Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Full from the Washington, D.C. Superior Court, the primary trial court for citizens of the nation's capital. Tonight, we will examine the United States justice system. I'll speak with an Afghan-American attorney who specializes in immigration and criminal law, and an American law professor who served in the Peace Corps as a volunteer in Kabul in the 1960s. But first, Judge Lee Satterfield will take us inside the D.C. Superior Court for a closer look at rule of law in America. Thank you, Judge, for allowing us into your courtroom today. We have two separate means, obviously, in the United States of addressing wrongs. We have the civil system and the criminal system. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the criminal system is one in which we have a different standard because we presume people to be innocent in the criminal system, and the burden is on the government or the state to prove their guilt, and we try to hold people accountable and responsible for any criminal activities. The civil system really is about money and folk who are seeking monetary damages for wrongs that occur to them, personal injury, car accidents, medical malpractice cases.
And what kind of cases do you hear?
Well, here in the Superior Court, we hear every type of case, from family law, civil cases, criminal cases. I'm chief judge now, so most of my duties are administrative, although I do carry a small caseload of criminal and civil matters.
What is your role as a judge doing a criminal trial?
Well, we want to make sure that the accused's rights are being upheld. We want to make sure that each side has a fair trial. We want to make sure that the law that's given to the jury is correct and appropriate for that particular case so that the outcome would be a fair and just outcome.
And, you know, in some legal systems, it's the judges decide the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Right. And in some countries like the U.S., the jury decides that issue in a criminal case and the judge only decides the sentence. Why do you think the U.S. legal system developed that way?
Well, I think you didn't want to have too much power in one place, and you wanted to have the community involvement in making important decisions that affect the community, because decisions about crime affects the community as a whole. And so to ensure sort of making sure we check and balance each other, we moved away from simply having judges make those decisions. So
in those 12 seats behind you as we speak would be where the jurors would sit when they would hear a criminal case.
That's right. They would sit in that chair the entire trial, most of the time remaining quiet, which is not always easy to do, although most of our judges, well, not most of them, but a number of them will allow jurors to ask questions through a process that's put in place. They're asked not to discuss the case until they've heard everything. We want you to hear all of the facts, hear from both sides if appropriate, hear what the law is, and then make your decision.
In terms of the system, are there different levels of courts in the U.S., and if so, what level is your court at?
There are different levels. This is considered a trial court, and then we have the next level, which is the Court of Appeals. So if I do something inappropriate or wrong or make the wrong decision on the law, individuals have the right to appeal my decision to the Court of Appeals. Most states have highest court is the Supreme Court. And then in our federal government system, we have trial courts, which are the U.S. district courts, and then all the way up to Court of Appeals in the United States Supreme Court, which is the highest court in our land.
Yeah, so you mentioned the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, how can an individual have their case heard here in the U.S. by the United States Supreme Court?
It's pretty difficult because we have so many layers to go through that the Supreme Court only takes a very small percentage of cases or matters that come through the trial court system. But they would continue to appeal it up through each court until the Supreme Court sees it as an issue that sort of covers nationwide, something that they should look at, and then they would look at it.
In a lot of countries, you've seen that rule of law becomes a problem. And when the system is weak, you have lack of security, lack of development. Do you think that this checks and balances of power is what's helped the U.S. develop?
I think it was very important to helping U.S. develop, because I can see any situation with any branch of government, if there wasn't this check and balance, could override the other branch. So I can come up and make a decision on the law and find that what the legislator did was wrong, but they can seek to modify the law to make it more appropriate. And the executive branch usually is a branch of government that appoints judges.
So, in terms of, being appointed, you were appointed in 1992, as I understand, by President Bush I.
Yes.
And in addition to being appointed, are there any other ways in which someone could be selected to serve as a judge?
Absolutely, and in many states they have elections, and so just like people, members of state legislatures or Congress are elected, or the president, they go to elective process. In other states, the governor will appoint the judges.
And is there any time limit, during which a judge can serve?
Sure, in our federal system, it's life, and it's that way because we want the judges to feel that they can make decisions and not be booted out of office because they made an unpopular decision.
And how are judges assigned to a specific case, or maybe how are cases assigned to a judge?
Well, it depends. In a big jurisdiction like this, as one of the responsibilities I have as chief judge is to assign our judges to different divisions within the court, whether it's criminal, civil, or the other divisions. Other locations, they handle cases that just come in, so a judge may handle a family matter, a criminal matter, and a civil matter.
Why is this concept of being impartial so important for a judge in the U.S. legal system?
Well, I think it gives credibility, believability to the result, and the sense of fairness that we strive to achieve in our system. We want judges who are objective and have no role to play other than to ensure that the right result is what happens in the case.
As you know, corruption within the justice sector is a problem worldwide.
Yes.
But have there been issues of corruption in the U.S. system? And if so, what are the repercussions, for example, for a judge who may take a bribe from one side?
Well, if that happens, you're going to be thrown out of office. You're going to be impeached. We have a system where we have committees that review our work, can take in any complaints such as that, and it's obviously a crime as well. So not only thrown out of office, you can end up in jail. So
going back to your role as a judge, what would you say is your most challenging aspect of your job, as well as the most rewarding?
I think the most challenging and the most rewarding are the same thing. When I worked on family court cases or domestic violence cases, those were the most challenging because you work with families that were in need or children that were not safe or victims of domestic violence. And there's an emotional cost in those cases. And so those were difficult cases trying to make decisions that will impact a family in a positive way. But on the other hand, when you do, and when you have a positive influence on a family or keeping a child safe or holding someone responsible, it is something that makes you very grateful that you have this opportunity to be a judge.
Judge Satterfield, I want to thank you for your time, for all your insights on the American legal system and your role as a judge and now a chief judge in the system.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
When we return, I'll speak with an Afghan-American attorney whose experience as a refugee inspired her to help others. I'm here with Mariam Sadiq, an attorney who specializes in criminal law and immigration law in the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you, Mariam, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You fled Afghanistan at a young age, and you saw firsthand the impact of law on refugees and immigrants. As you know now, many Afghan immigrants are returning back to Afghanistan. What do you think the government of Afghanistan should be doing to address refugee rights?
Well, I think that, number one, since most of them have been educated in the United States and have a wealth of knowledge to offer, they should definitely be grabbing those people with both hands and putting them in positions where their knowledge and skills can most be used to expand the knowledge base in Afghanistan, people who have been anxious to return back home, such as members of my own family.
And what about the Afghans who have lived in the tent cities? They didn't have a chance to get an education, but they're going back and they were displaced from their land. Do you think the government should be doing anything special for those groups?
Of course, much in the same way that the U.S. government helped the Afghan refugees when they came here, providing them with services, with skills, with job opportunities. I think that it's incumbent upon the Afghan government, it's very important for them to do the same thing, to give them a reason why they should be proud to return to Afghanistan. Education, job opportunities, all of those things, providing them with good housing, good health system, good social structure for them to return to.
So as an Afghan immigrant yourself here in the United States, as well as having counseled many immigrants who've come to this country, do you feel that the U.S. has a pretty good immigration system?
That's a tough question. We are a nation of immigrants. My family came here in 1971. Many came after those years. Everyone you speak to in this country, for the most part, except for the Native Americans, are immigrants. So I think to that extent, yes, we are a very open, welcoming country. I think that there are some issues that really need to be dealt with in this country. Just like in any others, we have clamped down to a pretty severe extent on immigration. There are some unfair laws in this country, people who have just come here to make a better life for themselves, children who have come here at a very young age with parents who don't have documentation, who have no way of staying in this country legally. That's very difficult to address.
Was there any particular event or influence that led you to become interested in becoming a lawyer?
Well, it's one of those things when you're a young child, your friends and your family say you like to argue, so therefore you should become a lawyer. And I think that I enjoyed debate. And I also liked to take the cause of the underdog.
Take us through the process of becoming a lawyer in the United States. How long do you have to study, and what did you study?
Well, when I was in college as an undergrad, I went to school for 4 years, and I was actually a philosophy major. So I studied all of the major and minor philosophers. I took what's called the LSAT, which is the entrance exam for law school. I studied for that for a very long time. I went to law school for 3 years with a special emphasis on immigration, human rights law, and criminal law. I was always interested in criminal law and the Constitution.
What led to your interest in criminal law specifically?
I think it's more of a fascination, maybe some of the glamour that is portrayed in modern television and movies. I had an opportunity to work in the DA's office when I was in law school in the district attorney's office, and I got to actually try my first case when I was just a second year in law school. And that really added to the appeal of criminal law for me. I have to say it's one of the most exciting things you can do. You're in a courtroom. When you're a criminal attorney, you have someone's life, their liberty in your hands. And in New York State, you get to pick a jury first. And it's such an enormous undertaking. You almost feel like you're outside of your own body when you're doing it. But it's very exciting. It's very intellectually stimulating. It's very powerful. Emotions that come over you when you do it.
Is there any particular case that stands out as in your mind as having been very exciting or very sad?
One of them was a couple of older gentlemen who had gotten in a fight. One of them ended up dying. He went to the hospital didn't treat him properly, and he ended up dying, but they charged his neighbor in that murder anyway. We tried the case, we had lots of medical testimony, and the older neighbor that was charged with the crime ended up being not guilty.
Was that your client?
That was my client. So that was a very proud moment.
In the U.S. justice system, juries are used. Can you explain very briefly the role of juries in the trial?
Well, the juries in this country, if you have a certain class of crime that you're charged with, you're entitled to a jury. And that basically means people from your community that do not have prejudice, that don't have bias, that haven't heard about your case. And they're actually the ones who decide the facts in your case. They're the ones who decide whether you're guilty or you're not guilty. So they have a huge role.
And how are the members of the jury from this community selected to come serve?
The government has tax rolls, and they choose directly from those tax rolls at random. So the whole room is filled with people who are just chosen at random to come in, and then they're questioned by the judge, sometimes by the actual attorneys, to find out what their thoughts are about the law, about just their general ideas and impressions of everything in their lives.
Why do you think that this concept of being presumed innocent until proven guilty is so important in the American justice system?
Well, it means that you get to start from a clean slate. So when you walk into a courtroom, if you had to tear it down instead and you had to prove someone's innocence, I think it would be very difficult from an attorney's perspective. It's very hard to prove a negative. It's very hard to prove something that doesn't exist. So if you walk in and the slate is clean and the government's job is to build on that, I think it just provides people with a very fair starting point.
But there's individuals who can't afford to hire their own attorney, so what options do they have?
Well, in criminal cases in the United States of America, you are entitled to an attorney. So the government has to provide you with an attorney. It has to be paid for by the government. So in a criminal case, you are 100% entitled to a lawyer.
Maybe some people would say, well, if this attorney works for the government, how could they be impartial to the defendant that they're representing?
Well, we don't work for the government. We get paid by the coffers of the government, but we are a separate branch, much like a judge gets paid by the government also, but they are neutral. Our loyalties are always, first and foremost, to our client, and they never go anywhere else. And if we don't do well by the clients that are assigned to us by the court to represent for free, we're not going to get anyone to pay us.
How do you see your role in representing a defendant?
I am the advocate for my client. I am the only thing standing between him, potentially, and a prison sentence or some other sort of impediment to his liberty, whether it's the fact that he won't be able to get the right to vote, he won't be able to buy a house or get a certain job, all of those things. So I am the person that stands between the government and his freedom.
And lastly, you know, let's say the trial has taken place and, you know, you get a certain ruling, but your client's not happy with it. What right does the defendant have to appeal that case, and how many times can they appeal it?
Well, it depends on, number one, the state you're in, number two, what you've done. If you are found guilty after trial, most states allow you an automatic appeal, at least one, to the next level court. If you take a plea, some states say you have to apply for leave to appeal. But there are lots and lots and lots of levels of appeals, not just through the state courts, but the United States is a federal system. So there are also federal courts that can run at the same time. So there are lots of ways for someone who believes that their criminal conviction is not accurate to try to challenge it.
Well, Mariam, I want to thank you for your time in describing your experience as a criminal and immigration attorney here in the U.S. and also as an immigrant who came to the U.S. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
When we return, I'll speak with an American law professor who has a special connection to Afghanistan. I'm here with Will Irwin, a professor of law here at the George Washington University. Professor Irwin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You actually served in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan in the late 1960s.
It was actually 1966, 67. I was in Kabul. It was a nice time to be there. It was a much different time.
And as an American, how did you feel living in Kabul during that time?
It was very welcoming, I think is the word I would use. Afghans, I think still and certainly then, were very hospitable. Memondar, I think is the word. And we felt like we had work we could do, that it was appreciated, that it was useful, that it maybe made, at least for a while, a small difference. The city was much smaller then, much simpler, not nearly the pictures you see now.
Did you ever get outside of Kabul?
Oh yes, oh yes. Peace Corps encouraged that. It was not a problem to do it. If you wanted to jump on a bus or on a truck and just go, you could go up north. The Salang Pass was built already then.
What was your most memorable time?
There's a river called the Andarab, which comes in from the east as you go north toward the Salang. And I just walked up the road along the river. I stopped at a small village. I had a tent. They welcomed me. They said, sure, put your tent here. I wanted to go fishing. They said, good luck. I don't think so, but you can try.
So you were an American in Kabul just walking alongside a river with the tent all by yourself?
Yeah, I had another Peace Corps volunteer with me, and we have pictures still of all of the people, mostly the men. The women were not so present, but the men and the boys were all proud to have their pictures taken with these foreigners. It was fine.
How did your experience in the Peace Corps impact your decision to become a lawyer?
I'm originally from the state of Iowa in the United States. It's a very fertile state. It has lots of rain. The farming is easy. And Afghanistan obviously is a different climate, a different way of farming. But what I learned is, first of all, be careful of your water. The irrigation systems in Afghanistan were fascinating. I've never seen anything like that. The other thing I learned was, if you read the histories of Afghanistan, much, at least of the eastern part, and the northern part of the country used to be forested. Well, already when I was there, no, not so much. And it wasn't because they were wasting the wood, they needed it to cut it to burn, to stay warm in the winter, but the resource was gone. And I saw that you need to be careful of resources. And so I thought maybe if I could come back and go to law school. The country had resource problems that law could have helped.
So you actually, when you went to law school, you afterwards specialized in environmental and natural resource law, and your experience in Afghanistan, seeing how important it is for a country to preserve its resources, led to your decision. Why do you think it's important to have these laws in place?
I think law in general gives people rules to operate by, puts limits on how they may behave as a citizen, how the society as a whole wants to govern itself. And if you put laws into place that tell people clearly, here are your rights to water, here are the limits to your rights to water, or really any other resource. If you wish to hunt an animal, okay, fine, then there are rules for governing that. And it is a way of protecting the resource, telling people what's allowed and what no thank you is not allowed. And it makes the society work better together. There's
actually reports that there's more conflict in Afghanistan that results because of resource issues, whether it's land or water, more than even insurgency. Do you think that's the case? And if so, what should the government be doing to address that?
It isn't only Afghanistan, it's also in the United States. Anytime resources are short or the demand for them is greater than the supply of them, you will get at least tension. And the concern is, for example, for water, that people will start fighting over water. And it has happened in the western United States as well, where it's just as short as it is in Afghanistan.
But why do you think in the U.S. they've been able to deal with it without having conflict?
There are, first of all, the laws. Secondly, there are agencies that will, for example, if you want to use water, give you a permit. If you exceed what you're supposed to be doing under that permit, there are people who will come and say, Mariam, you shouldn't be doing that. And if you keep doing it, then you may find yourself in one of the civil courts saying, I'm sorry, but that's not allowed and you have to stop. Or if it's really serious, why then you're in trouble with the criminal law.
So there's actually a framework and it has to be enforced.
The enforcement's important and the framework is important. And the framework will evolve over time as technology changes, as people change their expectations of what they should be allowed to do, as the resource changes, then hopefully the legislature is keeping up and is reading its science about how the law should be modernized, reformed.
Well, I really appreciate your time and for sharing your insights over the last 40 years about your experiences in Afghanistan. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
My thanks to Will Irwin, Judge Lee Satterfield, and Mariam Sadiq, and the George Washington University. We'd love to hear what you think about this or any other poll program. Just go online to aamtv.tv or tolo.tv. See you next week for another edition of Poll.